Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Sagacity. My name is Madara. I'm a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Waterloo studying Public Health and Gerontology. In today's episode, we have Kirk joining us from the University of Miami to talk about her Ph.D. experience. Hi Chloe, welcome to Sagacity.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's start with talking a little bit about what your Ph.D. is in and what your thesis is focusing on.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Chloe. I am just finishing up my third year, starting my fourth year of my PhD down at the University of Miami in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. My project specifically focuses around these things called amyloid bodies. I'm not sure if you've heard of these before. I actually hadn't really heard of this at all before I started in grad school. But essentially, these amyloid bodies are clumps of proteins that occur in the center of our cells, or the nucleolus, during states of stress. And the stress that I like to work with a lot is heat shock. So really all we do is we work with cells and we throw them in an incubator that is at 43 degrees Celsius. And then it stresses them out and causes amyloid bodies to form. Another way that we can also look at amyloid bodies is in something called acidosis. So when the cells get really low pH, which is another stressor, we see these amyloid bodies form. And why we care about these amyloid bodies is we see them actually in the center of cancer cells, which is back what my PI figured out, Dr. Lee, over 10 years ago. And we're trying to figure out a regulation system for, in part, if we can figure out how these amyloid bodies are both assembled and disassembled, we can relate this into maybe how cancer cells work. But a newer aim of the whole lab is amyloid bodies have implications in other amyloid diseases. So if you've heard of, say, Alzheimer's disease before, or Parkinson's disease, these are in a family of neurodegenerative diseases. And one of the hallmarks of many of the diseases is that they have amyloid plaques. So these are clumps of the same protein for the most part. For example, Alzheimer's disease is this protein called beta amyloid, or Parkinson's, this alpha-synuclein. Pretty much it's repeats of the same protein, say beta amyloid, over and over again that create these huge plaques in your brain. And that's what some scientists think cause Alzheimer's disease. And so what we're looking at is we see these amyloid bodies in our cells in normal conditions, and that our cells are actually able to make these amyloid bodies and get rid of them. So if we can figure out that whole mechanism, this could potentially be applied to all those other neurodegenerative diseases I talked about that also have amyloids in them. So please let me know if you want me to break that down more, though.
Very interesting. No, I think it was very clear. You talked about what the research focus is and its importance. Let's talk a little bit about how you got to doing this PhD in this specific area. Did you have any focus on this area in your undergrad, or did you have a master's on it? How did all that happen?
First of all, not at all. No specific experience in this research project before I joined. It just sounded really fascinating when I met with my PI. I didn't have any experience in this area. In undergrad, I really bounced around a few different labs because I was just trying to figure out what I was interested in. The first lab I ever worked in was actually my senior year of high school. I got to volunteer in a cancer biology lab, and I thought it was awesome. I loved the cancer biology behind it. But then when I went to undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, it's like, okay, I've tried cancer biology. I should try something new. So my first job research role when I went to undergrad was working for the Wisconsin National Primate Center. And there I worked on a bunch of different projects, all focused around primates. And I learned within 6 months I didn't like working with primates at all. So I found a different role in the Department of Medicine where we worked with mice. It was in a heart arrhythmia project. So I did a lot of genotyping, a lot of just general lab maintenance stuff. And then I did a specific project towards sodium channels. But I didn't like working with mice that much either. So as you're learning, I learned more and more of the things I didn't like, which led me to what I do like now. I then, in my junior year, got a very exciting opportunity to go to Japan for 6 months to work for a biotech company. And there I was working with bacteria. And I can't go too much into the details of that because it was confidential, but it was a really cool experience. And that 6 months in a biotech company, I got to do my own independent research. Like I had a mentor, but I was the one who had to do the literature searching to figure out what mutations I might need to do. And I loved it. I loved being in charge of my own project. So when I came back, I thought, one, I don't like working with animals, get me away from that. And two, I'd love to get more independent experience. So when I came back, it was the start of my senior year. And I went to a cell biology lab to do my senior thesis. Absolutely loved it. That was when I learned how much I loved working under the microscope. Back in the senior thesis lab in Wisconsin-Madison, they had a big confocal that the whole building got to use. And that was insane. I mean, the whole room is just a microscope, right? And when I was looking for PhD positions, I was like, all right, I know I want to do cell microscopy. That's where my heart's at. And so I didn't take a gap year or anything. I went straight from undergrad to graduate school. So it's my senior year. I was also trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I was between just going out and getting a job, grad school, obviously, law school, a lot of in betweens there. So I was in between a lot of different things. And to be honest with you, I just didn't really think I was cut out for grad school. I love doing my own research, but I just honestly didn't think I was smart enough. Like all the people you think of when you're in grad school, you think they're, the geniuses getting 100% in every exam, and that wasn't me. I was a science undergrad major. I did molecular biology, but I wasn't the one, scoring the top of the exams by any means. I was always just trying to rush off to the research lab I was in at the time, because that's what I really enjoyed. But I had a few different pushers. One was actually I started following a bunch of women on Instagram that were scientists, and I realized that there's people like me that are out there doing science in grad school. And then I had a couple of mentors in my job and then also in my research lab. They kind of give me that final push, like, what's the harm in applying, right? You might as well go do it. We'll give you that as a rec. You have the research experience. And so I went for it. And obviously one of the places I got in was University of Miami, which was amazing. And how I found the specific lab I'm in now, Dr. Stephen Lee's, an amyloid body research, is honestly after I'd applied and I was in that waiting period of trying to figure out if I'm going to get in, if I'm not. I looked up the different professors that I was interested in. And again, it just kept going back to anything that had cool images. I was right there. And so one of the PIs I reached out to was Dr. Lee. He got on a Zoom call with me. I loved his research. Then when I got flown down, because this was before the times of COVID, so you'd actually get flown down for interviews. And that's when I met Dr. Lee in person. And I fell in love with the research. I thought it was such a cool lab. I met the whole lab. I loved the lab. Everything really seemed great. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me. Oh, in the summer, originally the program I joined was like a rotation program, which is a lot of programs in the States where you join like the general program and then you rotate in like say 2, 3, 4 labs. Is that similar for you?
No, that's
Oh,
that I've heard of.
okay. So I guess maybe differences here, but at least in a lot of the schools, I think almost all of them that I applied to, you apply to like the general umbrella program is what's called. And then you pick 2 or 3 labs to rotate like 6 to 8 weeks in. And then at the end of that, you pick which lab's your favorite and you join that. But in the summer, I decided I didn't want to do that. I like Dr. Lee's research. I just want to get right into it. So I joined his lab straight away. I never did any of those rotations and never looked back.
You talked about being able to take rotations in different labs and pick the one that you like the most. I think that is amazing. I wish we had that. That takes me to my next question. What makes one eligible to get into these programs? Let's talk about the general program to begin with.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can tell you from my experiences, I don't have all the answers, but the biggest thing that I noticed when I was applying is they care about, first of all, your research experience. They want to see if you have independent research experience. And then second of all, I think the second most important factor is honestly grades. Because quite a few places I didn't end up getting into was I just didn't have the grades and honestly to cut it. But why I did get into some schools is because of research experience. So I say those are probably the 2 biggest factors. Obviously, the recommendation letters are really important in your CV and all that. But at the end of the day, I think the main thing PIs care about, because they're the ones who are looking at all these applicants, they come up with the group of PIs together. What they care about is we don't really want to start from nothing with the new PhD students that come in.
And did you have a master's?
No, I actually came straight from undergrad. It depends. Some universities prefer, you can actually look this up, certain universities in the States, like University of Wisconsin-Madison, for example, the average age of an incoming PhD student, say in biochemistry, I think was like 27 or 28, versus University of Miami, I believe it's like 24. So if you look at those age rankings, you can easily tell kind of what different schools want out of you first, or if you want more research experience, etc. I definitely would have done a master's or at least worked as a lab tech for a few years if I hadn't had the opportunities to do research during my undergrad.
Definitely. I think it's so cool that you did so much research in your undergrad.
Yeah. Again, I think it just came down to luck and then also going to such a big school like University of Wisconsin-Madison, tons of research opportunities. So I was never bored.
You said that you entered the PhD program direct after graduating from your undergrad. Did you have any publication when you?
No, I didn't, which I know I hear everyone. That's another thing I was scared about when I was applying to grad school. I have no publications with my name. My CV, it was pretty empty. I had maybe one or two poster presentations. And I think definitely having a publication would have very much helped. But I think it's a big myth that you need one in order to get into PhD programs.
All right. So you talked about the requirements to get into the program. Let's talk a little bit about the process of applying to the program.
Yeah, so I think it was pretty standard for not just University of Miami, but almost everywhere I applied. They had like a university portal where you'd pick either the specific programs you were applying to, or in certain cases, like University of Miami has this umbrella program. So, for example, you could apply to specifically the biochemistry department, the pharmacology department, etc. Or they have like an umbrella where all of those programs are included and you can do a rotation in any of them if you get accepted. And it's also important to look at those because certain times, say if you apply to the umbrella program, they might be super competitive versus if you apply to a specific program, you might have an easier time getting in or vice versa, depending on the school. So I made sure to look at that stuff as well. But each one has a university portal, and on there you pretty much submit everything. You've got your CV, your transcripts, your letters of rec, though they will send a link to them. So you aren't actually handling the letters of rec yourself. I believe a lot of them too had you had to answer also individual, like you put up your CV, but you also had to put in manually a lot of the things too, like the fill in the boxes that they had, maybe just to make their search engine easier. And then there's also the personal statement as well. So you submit all that, and unfortunately they charge you for the most part. I think it's like $50 or something per application. You get that waived in certain schools, so I definitely look into that. You submit that, I believe almost all of them are December 1st, and it's kind of just a waiting game. Some of them get back to you really fast, and other ones might not get back to you at all. And I think that's something that kind of is upsetting in the whole grad school process is if they don't want you, oftentimes they just won't say anything back to you. So you kind of have to keep an eye on what you hear, like other people, on social media or whatever. If they got interviews or something, you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm not getting an interview at Harvard University, for example. But like University of Miami got back to me actually, I think pretty quickly. I want to say beginning of January, maybe sooner. And in the cases of most of the schools, they do either an online Zoom interview, like kind of what we're doing now first. And then before COVID, they used to also fly you out, which is pretty awesome because they pay for everything. Unfortunately, with COVID, at least my school still isn't flying people out. For this year, they're still doing only Zoom interviews, which is a shame because I don't think you get quite the same understanding of culture. Like coming down to University of Miami, I was excited to come just because, it's Miami, Florida. But it was just such a good time meeting everyone. And you can really tell the culture of a school by meeting the other graduate students. And everyone just seemed very happy. I mean, all grad students are a little stressed, but they seem to still do stuff outside of grad school, which really appealed to me.
It's actually incredible that they fly in students because what if you don't have the funds to go and visit the place? That's the great opportunity to do that. And I think it's extremely important that you kind of feel the university, the culture before you settle to like study there for 5 or whatever many years, especially for a PhD. What's the structure of your program? In my program, for example, in the first year or so, we take courses and then we have an exam called the comprehensive exam, where you are tested on your knowledge and your preparedness to go ahead and do your research. And then you write a thesis proposal, basically what you're going to do in your research, present it, pass it, and then you go ahead and do your experiments or studies and write the thesis. What is the structure of your program?
Yeah, so I know every program is dramatically different. Even within the University of Miami, the biomedical sciences, I think there's like 7 different programs. Every single one of them is massively different from one another. Like one program, I think it's pharmacology, one program that I interact with a lot of the students, they came in the same time as me. They had to do what we call their qualifying exam. So they have to defend something in their first year. But their qualifying exam for them is you have to purposely pick something that is not your research topic. So you're in your research lab at that point, but you have to choose something that's different and be willing to research it, choose experiments that you do with that with your project and defend it in front of your committee. And then there's my program, which is like the other end of the spectrum, where we don't have any sort of comprehensive exam. We take a couple classes, but not many. I've taken way more classes than I actually needed to. I think maybe like 2 or 3 classes is what my department actually requires me to take. And then you mainly take those in your first or second year, but they're pretty straightforward. It's not like you need to study a bunch for them versus, again, there's another program called Cancer Biology where they have this class called Cancer Biology Bomb. And when you take that class, it's just, you've got to study. It's a 3 credit class, but you're expected, it's like, I don't know, 20 hours a week or something crazy. You've got to study a lot for it in order to do well. And then there's my program that there's none of that. So we don't have a comprehensive exam. We take maybe 2 or 3 classes, and then we have something called a qualifying exam, which is, we take it, we go on from being a PhD student to a PhD candidate. And any time after that, say, God forbid, you have to quit, something doesn't go right, you need to leave. If you have passed your qualifying exam, you're allowed to master out. So once you get that, you can have your master's. But it's different than, I don't get to say, now I've passed my qualifying exam, I have a master's degree, I can't put the MS after it. You just go straight to a PhD, and if you do drop out early, you get the master's. But the qualifying exam is, and I know everyone's qualifying exam is also different. We do a written kind of grant style, 6 pages, very similar to, like, in America, you can apply for like the F-30, F-31 through the federal government for funding. And I know a lot of people who just even take that grant that they send, modify it a little bit, and then submit it as their qualifying exam as the written portion. Then the other section, you do a written and you also do an oral. So you make a presentation. It should last about an hour and a half, the talk. And then you get your committee together, and you're scheduled about 3 hours, because it's an hour and a half talk, sure, but they can stop you for questions at any point. So it ends up being about double the time. And that's really the grilling. They don't care too much, at least in my department, about the written part. I didn't get any edits back or anything like that. It's the oral part where you could get stopped at anything and everything. Anything that's on your slide, you can get asked a million questions on. So that's definitely the scariest part. Fortunately, my department has a high rate of passing people from it. So as long as you've done your work and, you seem confident, you're good. But I do know, other programs have, that's the real weeding out part, where you very well might have to leave if you don't pass that qualifying exam. And then after that, it's just on your way to your PhD. My department does their qualifying exams really late. Ideally, they like to say by the end of your second year. I did mine about 3 months ago, so end of my third year. A lot of people I know haven't even done theirs, and they're about to start their fourth year. So anywhere between your third and your fifth year, realistically, is when my program does the qualifying exams. And then people graduate anywhere between 4 and 7 years.
Qualifying exam in your program, that is focusing on your research, or it's a topic that's not related to your research?
I did not point that out. So thank you for clarifying that. Yes, it's your project. So pretty much from the day I walked into the lab, anything I've done then is fair game to put my qualifying exam talk.
I think you answered a lot of the technical questions about what the program is, how to apply to it, and what requirements it has. Let's talk a little bit about your personal experience. So first, what kind of challenges have you faced since the day you thought of applying to a PhD program to this date, if there's any?
I think the biggest one is, it just comes back to not thinking I was cut out for it. There is such a steep learning curve when you go to grad school, because even though I said that I'd done independent research experience in undergrad, I think it's very different from actually, being in grad school and just kind of thrown off the deep end and expected to sink or swim. Fortunately, I started swimming, and you learn everything. But I'd say the biggest struggle is definitely just, even in grad school, thinking that you should be reading, 20 papers a day on top of being able to do 3 experiments, analyze your data, write a paper. It feels like so many tasks that you need to be some super genius in order to do it. And I think it doesn't help as well, the general thought of when you think of a PhD student or a scientist. In the movies, the TV shows, you think of some like brainiac nerd who doesn't socialize with anyone, stays in the corner, either is like a mad genius, is about to kill everyone, or super nice but super socially awkward and doesn't get much screen time. But either way, they're really smart, and it's just a lot to live up to when you're doing science yourself. I think that's the biggest one for me.
Did you face any specific challenges during COVID?
So I actually got pretty lucky in the sense that right when COVID happened, like March 2020, so lucky and unlucky. I just cracked the problem or uncovered my project pretty much. And I'd done enough experiments where I was certain this is the mechanism, this is what's going on. And then COVID happened, so I couldn't do any more experiments to keep up the momentum, which was the unlucky part. But the lucky part was it was going into this whole new avenue of we'd never studied this in my lab before. And I'd never had experience in the new avenue that we were going. So I actually was able to use that, 3-4 months where we weren't allowed in lab at all to do a literature search on everything that was known about it. And I can hands down say I would not be where I am right now in grad school if I hadn't had that 3-4 month dedicated window just to read, because there's so much to catch up on in the field that I had unknowingly stumbled into. And I definitely I wouldn't feel as confident as I do now, even though, it comes and goes with confidence in science each day. But I would definitely feel less confident if I hadn't had that opportunity. So that's one, I guess, good thing that COVID did for me. But everything else was, people ended up leaving. We changed the whole lab dynamic because I was the youngest grad student when I started in the lab. And then 2 people graduated during COVID because, they pretty much wrapped up their projects. So people started being allowed back in the lab. I was prioritizing the postdoc in the lab was prioritized because we were like mid experiments. We had a lot more to do versus the other couple grad students that were near the end. They maybe just had 1 or 2 more experiments that, worst case scenario, me and the postdoc could do it. And that was a little bit sad, I guess, just the whole dynamic changing. It's still a good lab dynamic, just very different from the one I entered to begin with. But I guess that's something in grad school in general is there's the constant in and out of students that is always changing dynamic.
Something I noted is that you actually have to go to the lab. In my case, I'm doing secondary data analysis, so I already have the data gathered. I'm just analyzing them. And
I mean, it depends on your experiment or what type of work you're doing for sure. Like I know some people are doing mouse work, for example, they didn't even get, COVID really wasn't a thing to them because they still had to go in and keep up with their mice. And I know computational students who still barely even go into lab because they don't need to. I'm kind of glad that I got to go into the lab still. I feel like it sets you up well, at least me. I need the whole routine of going somewhere to get stuff done, which I really like. But also that's because I live in a small apartment. So it's not like, I eat and sleep all in the same area. So maybe if I had like an extra room where I could go work, I'd be more productive at home.
yeah, that makes sense. And another really important thing that you touched on is the literature review. You said that you're so glad that you had that window to read and do the literature review. Literature reviews are so important for our audience, future students. A lot of people, I think, overlook the importance of literature reviews. It's not just reading about something, it's actually catching up, like you said, knowing everything that has been done in your area up until now. And then you kind of start your research from there or try to fill in the gaps, taking into consideration everything that has been done or not been done. Thank you for highlighting that. It's I think some students sometimes forget the importance of literature review or a systematic review. Great. One question I forgot to ask you about the specifics of the program is that how does the funding and the tuition work? Do you have to pay partially or is it fully covered? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so fortunately, this is the case with most programs, PhD programs that are biomedical science programs in the United States. Not all, so don't quote me on it, but most. They have to follow the NIH standards of giving you a stipend, the National Institute of Health. So most PhDs for biomedical science in the United States, there's a federal mandate of the minimum stipend that you give them, which is meant to be like a livable wage. I think it's maybe like, it's low though, it's like 25,000 maybe. It might have gone up because of COVID, so don't quote me on it, but something, I think it's below 30,000. And then certain universities, depending on where you are, like New York or now Miami, they give you a higher stipend just because the cost of living is much more. So I make, as of June 2022, we make $37,500 a year before taxes. And I think that breaks down to $2,700 a month, roundabout. I haven't done the math completely yet, which is better than a lot of other PhD stipends. So that's for sure. But there's still a lot more that could be done. For example, an average 1-bedroom in Miami now is $3,200 a month. So it's just, I mean, if you're only making, say, $2,700 a month, that just doesn't equate to a $3,200 a month apartment. So a lot of people, fortunately, I live with my boyfriend. So we're able to split the rent like that. A lot of other people have roommates, but even then, they're still paying like 2/3 of their stipend to their rent. It's pretty insane. And now, everything else has gone up too with inflation. I imagine you're having the similar issues. It's just it's tough to live on that stipend now.
In case, for whatever reason, your program gets extended, do you have to pay out of your pocket, or what kind of options do students have?
So I've fortunately not had to deal with that. What I know is in the text, the guidebook, when you join, it's 5 years guaranteed stipend. Any amount of years after that is up to review, and mainly it's down to your PI. If one, they have money for, if they want to keep you around, then they better have money for you. But there are certain situations, I only know of a couple, where say the PI completely loses funding and doesn't have money to pay the grad students, the university is required to step in that case and pay for the stipend for the rest of the 5 years at least.
All right, great. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about some of the positive experiences you've had. I mean,
Mhm.
from the way you talk about your program and your research, it really seems like you're really enjoying it, which is lovely.
Mhm.
Have you had any positive experiences that stood out from the university or colleagues
Mhm.
that has really helped you thrive in this journey?
I think the biggest thing for me is the community of people and friends, I guess now, that I've met throughout my PhD, because I think having a community with you while you're doing your PhD, you're not going to get through it if you don't have that, if you don't have your support system in place. And so I've been very fortunate. I have a few great best friends that are in my own department. Like one of them's literally next door lab to me, which just got really lucky. I've got great friends in the other departments that are all on the same campus. And I think the biggest, if you're worried going into grad school, like, oh my God, how do I make a support group? How do I get those friends? Just join as many organizations as you can, because that's what I did and it ended up working out. Like the Graduate Student Association for your school, or a book club, or whatever it is that you're interested in. If you join that, you're going to make really great friends. So that's I don't it's not one specific experience exactly. It's just getting to be with all the people that I love now. PhD, it's not always easy being in grad school. And you can talk to your parents about it, you can talk to your family, but unless they've actually done a PhD, they don't completely understand what it means when you say, I've been trying experiment for 6 months, it's still not working. They'll feel for you, but they haven't actually been in your shoes. So I think it's harder for them to completely understand. But I think by having those friends that are in the same, PhD realm as you have a lot more support because they just get what's going on.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to say, but agree 200% with you. That's right on point. Let's go back to your research question. If a student is to take on a research project or a PhD in your area of research, in amyloid research, what are some of the gaps that exist that they might be able to take on and investigate further, if you've come across any?
So the problem, I guess, is for my area of research is both very specific and very broad. I say that because it's very specific because we work with amyloid bodies, and because my boss is the one who discovered those, there aren't many labs that do it, and so there isn't much research on it yet, which means there's a lot of areas to go for sure, but there isn't many labs you can join that do that, if that makes sense. But on the flip side, where I say it's very broad, because there's so few labs doing it, there's just so much more we need to know about this stuff. Like there's implications in cancer, these and neurodegenerative diseases, but there's probably so many other things that it's involved in that we just haven't figured out yet. I don't have a great answer to your question. I guess the only thing I could talk to is related to my own project. That when I started, I was given like 4 or 5 different projects to try to figure out, which one actually might lead somewhere. And it was actually my project that I figured out, oh, there's a link between what we're studying in cancer cells and these neurodegenerative diseases, because I was seeing some overlap between the proteins that seem to be involved. So I guess my advice is, if you're trying to look for new gaps and stuff like that, go for think outside of the box. I know that sounds very generic, but so many diseases and so many things are interrelated, and we just haven't sorted through all of that yet. So if you just start looking in different fields, and suddenly you realize there's so much more overlap than you realize. But for example, if you're in a neuroscience lab, people are mainly focusing on the brain and mice, and they're not thinking about how it relates to all these other things. I don't know. That was kind of a roundabout answer. Let me know if I can answer anything more specifically than that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like it's an under-investigated area, so there's probably
Mhm.
a lot that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Probably There are some great research questions for future PhD students if you're interested in
Mhm.
this area. But the next question is, how do you maintain a balance? I know you spoke a bit about having friends and having activities to do outside of your research work. Is there anything else that you specifically consciously do to maintain a balance between your research work and life?
I'm not perfect at it. I'm just going to preface with that. There's definitely weeks I'm better at it, and then I'm less good at it. Where work takes the priority or life takes the priority. But some of the biggest things I think that have really helped is one, having a set schedule of when I go into lab. I think part of that's also the whole going into lab, or having a separate place to go work really helps. I try to do like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. is typically, some days it goes longer if you've got a longer experiment, or some days you might leave early for something. But having that kind of set thing going on means that anything I'm doing outside, before 8 a.m. or after 5 p.m. is my time. It makes me feel like I can do things with my life other than do my PhD stuff. My first year of grad school, I was all over the place. I'd work, 12-hour days, and then I'd be like, oh, well, I've spent 4 days in the lab, 12 hours each. I should just leave early on Friday. And then I'd feel guilty being gone early on Friday because I think, oh, I should be in lab, I should be doing work. And I think that guilt cycle gets to probably every PhD student. And I'm not immune to it anymore by any means, but by having that set schedule again, it just makes me feel like, okay, I can be done for the day, log off from the emails, close the Word document, whatever, be done. Extracurriculars have helped a ton too, because that often they happen in the evenings. It's like you want to stay till 8 p.m. at lab, or you've got your, I don't know, graduate student association event at 6 p.m. or book club meeting, something like that. I also think something that's really helped is just being in such a, honestly, a fun city, being in Miami. There's always stuff to do, and people always want to do it with you because you're right in the center of everything. There's always, a bar opening or a new restaurant or things that you can do. And sure, on the grad school stipend, it is a little tough, but there's good ways around it. Like, for example, happy hours, so you can get cheap drinks and stuff like that.
Definitely. The next question is, what is one PhD myth that you would like to debunk today?
Well, one, we've already touched on it, but I think this is the biggest one for me, is you don't need to be the smartest person in your class in order to get a PhD. I'm the prime example here. I still don't think I'm the smartest person in my grad program in anything, but I think as long as you have the passion for science and doing research, you'll get there. You'll beat the people that are the smartest 9 times out of 10 because you've got the dedication and the love for something that they might not necessarily have. So I think the biggest one for me is just go for it. Even if you're not the smartest, like, you never know what's going to happen unless you just apply and put yourself out there. I think that might be the one that comes to mind. Another big one that I've only learned in grad school is doing a PhD does not mean that you have to stay in academia forever. And in fact, most grad students don't stay in academia. And there's so many more paths out there than academia, or the backup, or, is normally given as the black sheep, is going to industry. So working for Pfizer or trying to think of it, Thermo Fisher or something like that. Those are not the only two career paths out there. And I don't think universities do a great job of explaining that, because mainly they want you to stay in academia forever. And if they don't want that, then they tell you industry, go work your bench job or whatever. But there's something I'm really interested in is science policy. So you can go work for the government and change how science is implemented at a federal level or a state level. You could go work for venture capital. So you could do startup companies of biotech. You could be an entrepreneur. So instead of helping companies start, you could be the company, the biotech company starting. Going to patent law, so working with science that people are trying to patent. Those are the ones that come to mind right now. But pretty much there's so many options out there than just academia or even just industry. And so don't think when you go to grad school that you're limiting yourself. I mean, I know even a couple of people who went to grad school and then are not even doing anything science related anymore, but they still have such good job prospects, because the idea behind a PhD, sure, you're learning a lot of science research, you're going to be an expert in whatever tiny project you're working on. But time and time again, what I hear from PhD alumni is it's the biggest skills you've learned are how to critically think, how you think better, how you sort through problem solving. And that applies to absolutely any job you ever do. Even if you decide that you hate science afterwards, you've got a skill set that you really only learned through 4+ years of a lot of hard work.
Perfect answer. We've come to the end of our interview. Lastly, what is one advice you would give to future and current PhD students?
I think something that I definitely had a hard time with my second year in particular is things fail more than they succeed. And that's okay. You're still going to graduate even when things don't go great. In fact, if anything, you learn more from your failures than you do from the things that work. My first year of grad school, I don't say everything went great, but I never had any major problems. The first year is when I did multiple projects and I found one that worked. It was awesome. Then I did that literature review. I came back. I knew exactly what experiments I needed to do. Everything was great. And in my second year, I started working on some experiments that did not work out, but we didn't find this out for like 6 months. I went through some dead ends where the experiments worked and I got good data, but we decided we're just not taking that angle anymore. We're shifting where the project's going. And there's a lot of data, especially right now as I'm making figures for a paper. I'm like, wow, I've done so much and also so little, in the sense that I've troubleshooted things over and over and over again. I've done the same experiment. I counted. I did the same experiment 10 times, and I've still got to do it again because I still don't like any of the images. So it's one of those things. I think if you're going into grad school or you're a current grad student, you are not alone that if you think that your experiments are failing and you're a failure and you're never going to graduate, because everyone's been there. And it's about kind of going back to what you learn in grad school as a whole is perseverance, that you try and again and again and again, and eventually it works, or you figure out a solution, you change directions, it all works out in the end.
The last question is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation about your experiences and your journey?
The biggest thing is, if you're interested in science, just go for it, apply to research stuff. And even if you don't like science, I always tell people this because I actually didn't like science in high school. I thought I was going to be a lawyer or go into business or something like that. But it was actually doing research when my senior year of high school, when I did the volunteering at a cancer biology lab. I realized how much different learning about science, like in the classroom, textbooks, multiple choice quizzes, is from actually doing research. So even if you don't like science classes, because gosh, I really, to this day, I didn't even like most of my science classes, because again, it's just you're learning out of the same organic chemistry textbook. And that is not actually how science research is. But that's something you don't realize until you actually do science research yourself. I mean, even my friends who they ended up not liking science research, but at least they tried it, so they know what's going on. And if nothing else, even if you actually hate science research, you at least understand then the process of the scientific method. Because again, you can learn that in a textbook, but it's completely different from actually doing it hands-on. You'll understand, for example, how the Pfizer vaccine is made, or Moderna COVID vaccine, right? You understand how science works if you work in a laboratory for a bit.
I just had that conversation with my supervisor. I was just telling him the other day that I know I learned all the multiple regression or the methods of regression in class, but when I'm actually doing it now, I actually understand what that is, and learning it and memorizing it just for the sake of being successful in that course. Mm-hmm. It's a whole other thing. Yeah. So
you don't care about it. You're like, what's, I've got to remember it for the multiple. Yeah, I completely get it.
Yeah, doing it is completely different. And I think that's why it is important for students to kind of check out these things, or try a study or an internship in a lab in their undergrad before committing to a PhD program. Chloe, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was really lovely to have you. It shows that you love your work, and I wish you all the best with the rest of the program.
Well, no, thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast. I really appreciated you reaching out. I hope that if you've made it to the end of this, thanks for listening. And yeah, I hope you get something out of it.
Yes, everyone, thank you for being here with us today. I hope this video was helpful to you. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.